adding incentive hooks to your performance-based contracts. One week before a performance-based contract was supposed to be executed, a client's senior executive asked my coaching client to add some more hooks to the performance-based contract. So what exactly did the senior executive mean by a hook? Well, I'll answer that question in this webinar. And yes, the supplier did agree to the changes. Be sure to check out the first 4 webinars in the Manager Training series. And watch my case studies too on YouTube. In my case study analysis on incentives, I'll describe how one client is using a custom-built scorecard that I described in the last case study to locate the right metric to incentivize supplier performance. And if you want to learn how to build your custom scorecard, which is super helpful to develop incentives, watch this specific case study video on YouTube now. Okay, let's get started. Performance-based contracts are a class of agreements where payment for goods and services is contingent on the supplier achieving clearly outlined performance goals or desired outcomes. Typically, performance-based contracts contain the 5 following critical components. 1, a performance work statement or a performance-based statement of work. 2, a quality assurance surveillance plan. 3, performance-based metrics. 4, contractual incentives or disincentives. And 5, the right pricing model. All of my advice is as applicable to service and manufacturing contracts. All right, so what the executive wanted was a better balance of incentives for exceptional service, not just liquidated damages. That's why the supplier agreed to the changes. Now, incentives and disincentives, usually in the form of liquidated damages, are the 4th element in all performance-based contracts. As a quick note, many contract professionals think only in terms of liquidated damages by getting a supplier on the hook for predetermined financial remedies if a supplier misses a service level agreement, a milestone date, or something similar. I've discussed liquidated damages in this article for contract nerds. Check it out if you want to know more about liquidated damages. Today, I am focusing on incentives because fewer contracts include incentives. We have 4 agenda items today. Why include incentives in the contract? What is an incentive? 4 types of incentives. And finally, 2 suggestions to include incentives. 1 suggestion for software and 1 for goods and services. All right, so why do we include incentives in a contract? Incentives motivate both parties, customer and the supplier, to make decisions that will meet relationship goals by balancing the economics of the performance between the supplier and customer. Typical pricing mechanisms such as fixed fees or time and materials have economic flaws that create misalignment between the economics of the work, what it costs to perform, what its value is, and the required outcomes that the customer is expecting. For example, fixed fees incent suppliers to make unilateral decisions to make their profit goals, which might mean that suppliers might make decisions to cut corners in the service if that's what it takes to make a profit. The relationship goals suffer and the customer is economically powerless unless the contract includes incentives. Time and material pricing acts like a metaphorical debit card to the customer's ATM, allowing the supplier to throw everything at the problem to fix it without regard to costs. The relationship goals might be met, but without any regard to cost efficiency. And there, suppliers may also make unilateral decisions to assign more people or to overpurchase materials to meet that relationship goal. What is an incentive? Incentives provide financial and non-financial benefits to both parties. A well-defined incentive encourages both the supplier and the customer to meet performance expectations by working together. Here's a public example from history. A little over 100 years ago, the Wright brothers entered into a contract with the United States Army to build planes. The contract provided a target price, a minimum speed for the plane, a target speed for the plane, and a financial incentive for each mile per hour the plane was able to fly beyond the established target minimum speed. Now, if you're interested to know more, I write about this in my book, The Vested Outsourcing Manual. Look at page 185. So back to the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers beat the minimum speed and received more money. The United States Army got faster planes, and that's how incentives are meant to work. The Wright brothers worked to increase the speed of the plane, benefiting its customer, the United States Army. The United States Army, with a superior product, then paid more money in the form of an incentive to the Wright brothers. That's the way that incentives are meant to combine goals for both the customer and the supplier so that they're working together. There are 4 types of incentives. Typically, people don't really think about the different types of incentives. So let's review the list to see how many types of incentives you can include in your next performance-based contract. The first is reduced costs. Everyone talks about this is the most obvious. This is why the time and materials contract is like a debit card to the customer's ATM. It's the most obvious, and customers incentivize suppliers to better manage costs in the delivery of goods and services. Typically, a customer and a supplier will share any savings, gain share, when actual project costs are compared against the budget estimate or a target price. Not all companies and not all industries gain share. So that's one challenge with this type of incentive. There are also performance incentives, and these can be very effective, but they require a very complete statement of work and service level agreements or KPIs, both of which I discuss in other earlier manager training series seminars. Performance incentive is usually tied to some sort of quantitative target, such as completing a phase of project before the deadline. That performance incentive can also be qualitative, such as beating a customer satisfaction target in a help desk contract. The third type of incentive is an award incentive. Now, these incentives are helpful for a one-time agreement that meets a one-time goal. So as opposed to service level agreements that endure for the life of the project, not just the life of the contract, an award incentive is appropriate for a shorter term agreement so that at the conclusion of a one-time, usually one-off agreement, when the supplier meets that one-time goal, the supplier gets a financial bonus. Now, this is helpful when the nature of the work makes it challenging for the parties to set a predetermined service level agreement or key performance indicator at the time of contract execution. The final and fourth type of incentives is additional contract duration. Now, these incentives can be overlooked as an incentive. However, they are equally powerful. This incentive is invoked when a customer chooses to extend a supplier's contract for another year or two when a supplier demonstrably meets or exceeds a performance target. Now, this incentive reduces transaction costs to both the customer and the supplier by tying the contract duration to performance not just to their convenience. So this is different than an evergreen contract where the customer or the supplier automatically renew the contract for another year. This is an option that is based on a metric and a scorecard, that the option is only executed if that performance metric is either met or exceeded, depending on how you structure your incentives. Here are 2 suggestions to include incentives in your performance-based contract. First, if you're developing custom software, consider combining an incentive for both reduced costs and with a performance service level agreement. Now, this is going to balance the economics of the deal. If the supplier is able to perform and meet a service level agreement while also reducing costs, that's going to be very beneficial to the customer, because service providers in custom software development can throw a lot of people at it, meet a certain milestone date for a scrum, for some sort of phased agile development or other form of service level agreement, but then blow your costs out of the water. So think about how you might be able to tie those 2 together. The other, for the delivery of service or goods on a more manufacturing or more traditional industry, such as utilities, think about milestone payments for meeting a critical path date that is tied to the supplier's profit. Now, this is different than costs, because suppliers' profit goes right to their bottom line, where reducing costs may not actually improve their bottom line if they're judged or reviewed on revenue as opposed to on cost efficiency. So by meeting a critical path date and tying it to supplier's profit, you can make a fixed price agreement economically profitable for the supplier without necessarily cutting corners. So this means that a supplier may be eligible for an additional payment or additional profit percentage for completing a task in a phased development or delivering a custom item of equipment. And then that additional payment or that additional percentage of profit is categorized as an incentive for meeting or beating that milestone date. Again, both of these examples balance the need to meet certain goals with the supplier's desire to make some sort of additional profit. So are you intrigued to learn more? Stay tuned. I've got one more very important manager training series on developing pricing models. I provide information to help you draft, negotiate, and manage performance-based contracts. If you want the manual to learn at your own pace, you can purchase a copy of the Contract Professionals Playbook on Amazon. And please share this with your teammates.